What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Death Note 2, The Last Name. It's finally time to continue my thoughts on Death Note 2, and once again I'm joined by BLACKTASTIC Media, who joined me for my review of the first one. These reviews are for the live-action Japanese versions of the films. This is based on an anime and a manga series, so if you guys have not seen those or have not seen the review for the first one, I highly recommend checking it out. But this first and second film are just kind of a movie version of what the series is, and I talked about it in that video. It's kind of hard to do that a lot of times. A lot of these anime live action adaptations try to cram a lot of information that's told over many episodes into a movie. I have to credit the people who made these films for at least knowing to try to stretch it into 2 movies, because there is a lot of story, a lot of plot, a lot of character development that, you know, really fleshes these things out in the anime and in the manga that just isn't capable of happening in a lot of these live action anime adaptations. So a big thanks to BLACKTASTIC for being here in this video. You can find the link to his channel down below in the description box, and we'll be hearing from him in just a little bit. But what I could say about this movie right out of the gate is that there are elements about this movie that I like more so than the first one, but overall I found this movie to be just okay overall. I wasn't blown away by it, but there were elements about it that I think I liked more than the first one. I've had some more time to think about it since I saw the movie, and overall, similar to the first one, you kind of have weak special effects, right? It's very much of its time. This movie came out in 2006, but even then, we had already gotten films like Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith and various other big installments of big franchises that were using tons of CG, so these CG effects in this film are very cartoony compared to anything that had already come out at the time. Now, after you've seen the first film, you've kind of gotten accustomed to the acting, maybe some of the overacting, the directorial style, and the CGI effects. You can go into this one and kind of just ride with it, right? But it's still something that I feel is at least worth mentioning. And yeah, we pick up right after the events of the first film, and what I found was kind of funny about this movie is not long into the movie, like literally in the first couple minutes, you have this character or these sets of characters who are seeing the main characters from the first film and are talking about them in the third person in a way, or just kind of explaining who they are, giving the audience this expository dialogue that just doesn't feel natural. It would be essentially like if I saw somebody over there and I was like, hey, it's that guy Rick, the guy from that one time that he did that one thing, and yeah, I remember that time he did this thing and he did that thing. I wonder how he's feeling about that. It's essentially what that is. You know, I kind of didn't even really give a lot of context there, but the idea being just somebody off to the side seeing somebody and explaining who that person is, kind of just filling in what happened at the end of the first film, which I felt was kind of a cheap way to kind of give exposition that I don't really feel was necessary, because I think if you're going into this movie, you probably saw the first one. But beyond that, I found the story to be a little bit drawn out. There are some really great moments of performances at times, but there's also this very overblown performance element. You know, I am a fan of anime. I watch a lot of anime. I'm currently watching an anime on my free time, and what I can say about anime is that it has a very distinct feel and vibe to its characters, its dialogue, its overacting that very much fits that medium. And sometimes when they try to translate things directly to live action, as far as some of the performance elements and, you know, some of the things that characters do, it just doesn't work. There's an absurdity to what comes with anime and a bit of a silliness that really works with that medium that just doesn't translate well in live action. And I feel like this movie definitely had a lot of those same issues that I had with the first one. The most notable of those being the character of L. He's a character in the anime who is consistently eating. He has a certain way of standing. He has a sense of mannerisms and movement and the way he sits on chairs that is very specific to his character. And in the anime, it works. It's very much that weird anime feel that you definitely expect from anime. But when it comes to these movies, I just feel like they went a little bit overblown with his character specifically being almost exactly like the character from the anime, to the point where it's kind of cringy to watch. Anytime L was on screen, I was cringing. I don't really like the performer that they chose for him. He's acting exactly like the character, and for some people that might work, but for me, it just kind of takes away from it, because again, it should be an adaptation rather than an absolute complete copycat that, again, those things don't always translate from one medium to the next. There are certain things that just have to work in that certain realm. I think that this movie was in anime form, you know, if this was an anime similar to the actual anime series, then it would work. You know, if they were to condense the anime show into anime movies, then that kind of element would work. But as far as it making its kind of debut in live action, the whole overeating thing that L is constantly doing, the way he walks around, it just is cringy and makes some of these scenes hard to watch. and that's how I felt with his character throughout the course of the film. Now, before I continue my thoughts on it, let's go ahead and hear my buddy BLACKTASTIC have to say about this one.
What's up, ladies and gents? It's your boy, landed on planet Anthony A. Perez. I'm back to do another collab and a follow-up to the first film, Death Note. Now, this time we're discussing Death Note Part 2, The Last Name. This kind of reminds me of, movies being filmed back to back to keep the cohesiveness going. This film was definitely way more detailed than the first. Now, the first, to me, was more action-packed than this one. And he had a lot more of the death god in part 1. He's hardly ever in this movie in part 2, which was very disappointing. And what I couldn't understand, this movie leaves off exactly at the point as the first one, and the death god looks totally different in this one. I was like, man, that's weird. Misa, she plays a much bigger role in this one. You find out there's another Death Note book, which thickens the plot. But man, this movie is a lot of exposition and no action. A lot of people talking, a lot of people posted up and just discussing theories and plot points. Some of the death scenes are pretty cool, but what really got me in this one, L is a weird dude. I thought he was weird in part 1, but he is really weird. It's hard to really lock in on his character, man. There's nobody in these movies that I can, latch on to. They're weird. I know the anime and the manga is way out there, and they try to make this very comparable to those, but sometimes when you try to match that level of absurdness, it doesn't come across cool. It comes across as weird and sometimes annoying. And I gotta say, when it comes down to the two matching wits for wits, it kind of reminds me of trying to replicate the X-Men. You have Professor X dealing with Magneto, and it's trying to portray that, but it does it in a really, really bad way. It doesn't come across well, but I appreciate it. Now, the premise is still Loctite. I love it. I love the second book of Death Notes. I love the female. She is fantastic in this film, and it adds some levity to the plot. It's just, it doesn't really go anywhere. It stands still. It's locked in gridlock and goes nowhere. And they're so focused on these characters. Now, I will give it this. The character development is much, much more elaborate in this movie, and it flushes a lot of things out. Hence, a whole lot of talking and a whole lot of nothing happening. But if you're a fan of this series, you might like this. I didn't like it more than the first one. In fact, the first one to me had me a little bit more engaged. But I will appreciate this. The first one prepared me to watch this one. Once you realize the CG is bad, the plot points, the people, and the overabundance of acting, you're well equipped to sit through the second film without any hiccups. It's just not as good as the first one, in my opinion. It had its moments, but that's about it, man. So, wow. I really need to see the manga or the animated one next, because these two films leave me less desired to watch anything else in this universe far as live action. Like I said, I didn't get all the way through the Netflix version of it. In the future, I probably will, but for now, wow. It was nice to broaden my horizon, see something new, and take in some new information and some new directing styles. with some very interesting characters. But with that, I gotta say, yo, Anthony Perez, love to hear your thoughts on this even more. Like I said, me and you are kind of seeing eye to eye. I'm guessing how you feel about this, but I know how I feel. I'm cool. I would not revisit this universe again as far as these two films live action. With that, I say peace, love, respect, love thy neighbor, and as YouTubers, let's change the world. I'm out, and remember, it's just my point of view.
A big thanks to BLACKTASTIC for being here in this video, and it seems like we're pretty much eye to eye on this one, man. You have a really solid premise with everything with the Death Note. We have new characters introduced in this story, and you mentioned that the Death God in this film looks different, and that's because there are two different Death Gods in this film. And Ryuk, the one who's the main Death God who's known from this series, is very, very little in this film. He does not have a lot of screen time. He was a bigger part of the first film, and in this one, we don't spend as much time with him. We spend more time with the new Death God in this film, who is attached to the new Death Note. And I like the way that they kind of incorporate the story from the anime into this film in a lot of ways, but a lot of the performances, the way that the film is shot, there's an element of this film that does kind of become a little bit boring, a little bit samey about halfway or even more so into the film. There's an element that when you think about this movie, it does kind of blend in with the first one and not in necessarily the best way. You know, they do feel all like one big movie, but it starts to blend and you start to think, all right, was this scene from that movie or was this scene from this movie? It does kind of feel a little bit just all over the place. And there are a bunch of characters thrown into this film who are introduced that are completely eradicated from the story later on that do nothing for this version of the story and this adaptation. There are things and elements that I feel could have been worked around or maybe completely removed from this story that just don't need to be there, that kind of just extend the runtime and make it all kind of feel a little bit more bland. Overall, when I think back on this film, there are elements about some of the performances I like, specifically the guy who plays the main character, L. I think he's the strongest point of all these movies. But beyond that, I found a lot of the elements as far as the story and the characters to just be a little bit boring, a little bit bland, and not really all that interesting. There are elements about the film that are interesting though, and I think the premise of a Death Note, this book that you can write people's names into and they'll die in the way that you wrote it, I think that that's incredibly interesting. I think it's one of the greatest premises from any anime. I love it in the anime. I've never read the manga, but I love it from the anime, and that's just a premise that I've always thoroughly enjoyed, and I think it's what really keeps me engaged with both the first film, this one, and the Netflix American version, is just the premise of this book that you can write names into, that you can kind of take control of people's lives and kill them and do various things. And I like the detective story that's mixed into it, but at a certain point it does become a little bland, a bit boring, and a bit samey. So yeah, my overall thoughts on this film is that it was just alright. There really isn't much for me to ever want to revisit this film. I wasn't really attached to any of the characters. I never cared about what was going to happen to anybody, and by the time the film was over, I instantly thought to myself, probably will never watch this movie again. So Death Note 2, The Last Name, a big thanks to BLACKTASTIC for being here in this video. I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. Do you like these Japanese versions of Death Note, or do you prefer the anime? Do you prefer the American Netflix version, which I know is a bit of a controversial topic depending on who you talk to? Yeah, overall, I will continue to go through these Death Note films here on the channel, but what I will say is that I think that when I look back at these first two movies, these Japanese versions, I think there's a lot that really works. I appreciate them really trying to keep very true to the anime, but there are elements that I think they should have adapted to live action in a way that works better for live action. So yeah, guys, that's going to be my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. Hit that like button, subscribe for more videos, comment your thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.